He was the face of vengeance, the man whose cold stare could silence a room. To millions, Charles Bronson was the ultimate tough guy, unbreakable, fearless, untouchable. But behind that stone expression was a truth so deeply buried, even those closest to him barely saw it. For decades, Hollywood painted him as a man made of steel. Yet the real Bronson lived with shadows fame could never erase, a hidden past he almost never spoke about, a name he once buried, and a loss that haunted him until his final breath. This is not the story of a movie star. It is the story of a man who built an entire life to protect one secret, a secret that reveals who Charles Bronson truly was.
Before he was Charles Bronson, the screen legend, he was Charles Dennis Buczynski, a quiet boy born into crushing poverty in the coal fields of Pennsylvania. He was the 11th of 15 children, growing up in a wooden shack with no running water, no electricity, and sometimes no food on the table. His father, a Lithuanian immigrant, died when Charles was just 10. Overnight, the boy who barely spoke English was thrust into the mines, digging coal to keep his family alive. That kind of childhood does not build dreams, it builds survivors. Down in those dark tunnels, Bronson learned silence. He learned endurance. He learned to take pain and wear it like armor. Every breath of coal dust, every bruise, every lost day, they carved out the man he would later become. But no one knew that behind his stoic face, he carried shame. Shame of poverty, shame of hunger, shame of being seen as less than the men who looked down on him. He swore that one day no one would ever pity him again. That vow would drive him through war, through Hollywood, and through heartbreak. But before the fame came something far darker, a battle most men never speak of, because the next chapter of his life would change him forever.
When the Second World War erupted, Charles Buczynski didn't hesitate. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces and was sent straight into the chaos. There, inside a B-29 bomber, he worked as a tail gunner, one of the most dangerous positions in the sky. He flew missions over Japan, trapped in a metal box with nothing but a machine gun and the sound of death all around him. He saw men disappear in seconds, friends who never came back. By the time the war ended, Bronson had survived more than 24 missions and earned a Purple Heart. But when he returned home, he never talked about it. Not once. The silence wasn't pride. It was pain. He had seen what fear looked like up close, and he refused to show it again. That same control, that same quiet defiance, became his identity. People thought his cold, blank stare on screen was acting. It wasn't. It was memory. It was the reflection of a man who had seen enough horror for one lifetime and decided to bury it deep beneath his skin. But war wasn't the only thing he buried. Because after coming home, Charles did something that would erase his past and create the myth of Charles Bronson.
In the early 1950s, Charles Buczynski was chasing a dream that did not welcome men like him. Hollywood was a world of perfect smiles and American names, not Eastern European coal miners with broken English. He was getting small roles, barely noticed. Casting agents often stumbled over his last name, Buczynski. Then came the Red Scare. That feverish moment in American history when having a foreign-sounding name could end a career overnight. So, he made a choice. He buried Buczynski forever. Charles Bronson was born. The name came from a street near the film studios, Bronson Avenue, but to him it became armor. He could hide behind it. He could be anyone. And finally, he could leave the shame of the coal mines behind. Yet deep down, It was a betrayal of who he truly was. He had erased his roots to survive. That secret, that name, would stay locked away even when fame came calling. But the new name did more than protect him. It transformed him. He started to look like the man the world wanted him to be. Hard, silent, dangerous. And soon, that quiet strength caught the attention of directors who would turn him into a legend. The miner's son was about to become the face of vengeance. But the fame he was about to earn would cost him far more than he expected.
By the 1960s, Charles Bronson had become the man every director wanted and every leading man feared. He didn't need words. He could tell an entire story with one stare. His breakthrough came with The Magnificent Seven, then The Great Escape. He wasn't the star, but people remembered him. That silent strength, that unspoken rage, it drew the audience in. But while Hollywood hesitated, Europe embraced him completely. In France, Italy, and Germany, Bronson was a god. He was the face of raw masculinity, the working man's hero. European critics called him the thinking man's tough guy. Back home in America, studios still didn't know what to do with him. He was too old to be the new hero, too rugged to play the charming lead. Yet he didn't care. He had waited all his life to be seen. And finally, the world was watching. Then came Death Wish in 1974. Overnight, he became a phenomenon. The film turned him into a symbol of justice, anger, and revenge, a man who did what others only imagined. But with that fame came something else. He became trapped inside his own image, the man who never smiled, never cried, never broke. And while the world celebrated the myth, the man himself was slowly fading behind it. Because behind the cameras, Bronson's heart belonged to only one person, a woman who would change his life and later destroy it.
In a world of violence, fame, and cold stares, Charles Bronson found something rare: peace. Her name was Jill Ireland. She was radiant, confident, and already famous in her own right. They met in 1968, introduced by actor David McCallum, who was, at that time, her husband. But destiny doesn't ask permission. Bronson fell for her instantly. He once said, "I'm going to marry that woman." And a few years later, he did. Together, they became one of Hollywood's most private yet powerful couples. On screen, they shared passion and tension. Off-screen, they built a quiet world filled with children, horses, and long walks far from the spotlight. For a man who had known only hardship, she was his calm, his reason to breathe. But that peace didn't last. In the late 1980s, Jill was diagnosed with breast cancer. Bronson, the man who had faced death and war without blinking, suddenly found himself powerless. He watched the love of his life fade away, and there was nothing he could do. When Jill passed in 1990, something in him broke, quietly, permanently. He carried her ashes in a cane wherever he went, like a part of her soul still walking beside him. Friends said he was never the same. The laughter disappeared. The warmth vanished. Only the mask remained, the stoic face of Charles Bronson, hiding the grief of Charles Buczynski. But the story didn't end there, because as his fame grew even higher, so did the walls around him. And soon, that tough guy legend he had built became a prison he could never escape.
After Jill's passing, Charles Bronson was surrounded by everything a man could want: money, fame, respect. But none of it mattered anymore. He had become a global icon, yet the world saw only one version of him: the silent avenger. The man who never flinched, the man who solved pain with violence. But that wasn't who he truly was. Off camera, he was quiet, gentle, even shy. He painted, tended his garden, and rarely spoke about his work. Friends said he could sit in total silence for hours, not because he was cold, but because he had nothing left to prove. Still, Hollywood didn't see that. They wanted more vengeance, more grit, more Bronson. So, he gave it to them. Sequel after sequel, each one louder and bloodier than the last. But every time he picked up the gun on screen, he drifted further from himself. It was as if he was trapped inside his own myth, a man defined by revenge, playing a part he could never escape. He had built the legend. Now the legend owned him. By the late 1990s, his health was declining. His breathing grew shallow, his body weak. But he refused to let the world see him fragile, because the toughest man in cinema couldn't show fear, not even at the end. Yet, behind closed doors, he faced something far more terrifying than fame or death. It was the truth about what he had kept hidden his entire life, a secret even his fans never imagined. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, Charles Bronson had disappeared from public life. He retreated into quiet seclusion, no interviews, no appearances, no explanations. The man who once dominated screens now lived behind high walls in Beverly Hills, surrounded by silence. In his final years, illness began to strip away the armor he had worn for decades. He suffered from chronic lung disease and the fading memory of Alzheimer's. The body that once symbolized strength was breaking down. Yet even then, he kept his secret close, the secret he had hidden since his earliest days. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't about money or fame. It was something deeper, something human. The truth was that Charles Bronson, the world's toughest man, had lived his entire life feeling unworthy of love. He had built walls of silence to protect himself from humiliation, from weakness, from pity. That's why he rarely smiled, why he refused to talk about his past, and why he kept his childhood name buried forever. Behind the mask of power was the scared little boy from the coal mines, still hiding his hunger, still afraid of being seen as poor, small, or broken. When he passed away in 2003 at age 81, the world mourned an icon. But few realized that the man they admired had spent his entire life running from the boy he once was. That was the secret Charles Bronson tried to hide, that all his power, all his silence, all his strength were built to conceal the pain he never escaped. And in that silence, the legend of Charles Bronson became eternal, because no one could ever break what he refused to reveal. Long after his final bow, the legend of Charles Bronson only grew stronger. His movies still fill late-night channels. His face still stares down from vintage posters, jaw set, eyes unflinching. To millions, he's still the man who took justice into his own hands. But the truth behind that image tells a very different story. Bronson wasn't just a symbol of toughness. He was proof of how pain can be transformed into power. Every line on his face, every moment of silence, every glare that burned through the screen came from a lifetime of survival. In an industry built on make-believe, Bronson never faked a thing. He didn't charm his way to the top. He endured his way there.
He made pain look like confidence and heartbreak look like control. That's why audiences believed him, because somewhere inside, they recognized their own battles in his silence. Today, his name stands beside cinema's most enduring icons, not because he was the loudest, but because he was the most real. The man who said little, but revealed everything through his eyes. And perhaps that's the true secret he carried. Not something shameful, but something deeply human. That behind every image of strength lies a history of struggle. And behind every legend, there's always a man who once needed to be seen. Charles Bronson never wanted the world to know his pain, but in trying to hide it, he created something immortal. Charles Bronson spent his life behind two faces, the one the world adored and the one he kept hidden from it. To his fans, he was steel. To those who knew him, he was silence. But maybe that's what made him timeless. He never asked for sympathy, never explained himself, never chased fame. He simply was. A man who turned pain into presence, who carried his scars like medals, and who proved that strength isn't about how loud you are, it's about how much you endure. And that was the secret Charles Bronson tried to hide. Not weakness, not shame, but the truth that even the toughest souls are shaped by heartbreak, loss, and survival. Today, his story reminds us that behind every legend lies a fragile heart, one that fought the world in silence and still left a mark too deep to fade. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden side of Charles Bronson, there's plenty more where that came from. Here on RetroCeleb Talk, we go beyond the headlines, revealing the untold stories, the forgotten struggles, and the secrets behind Hollywood's most iconic stars. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss another story from the golden age of film. Because every legend has a secret, and here we make sure it's never forgotten.